Welcome to Creation Celebration. Today we want to talk about amazing design, particularly of the eye. When you look at someone's eye, you often will notice the color. Well, the iris is what gives the eye its color. The pupil is the black opening in the center that constricts or dilates depending on whether we are in bright light or dim light. Now, a very important aspect of the eye is the lens system. The cornea is the first part of that system. The purpose of the lens system is to focus the images. So here we see the cornea, and behind it is the lens of the eye. The lens is what adjusts focus for either near vision or far vision. The way it works is that the ciliary body contains some little muscles. The lens is attached to the ciliary body with these suspensory ligaments, and those muscles of the ciliary body will adjust the shape of the lens. When the lens is flatter, objects that are far away will be focused on the retina. When the lens is more spherical in shape, objects that are nearby will be focused on the back of the retina. Now, sometimes our eyes are not able to adequately focus. We wind up with blurred vision and we need glasses or contact lenses. Or we may undergo LASIK surgery to correct this refractive error that causes us not to be able to focus. Now let's talk about the extraocular muscles. These muscles can move our eye in all directions, up, down, around, and from side to side. We have 4 rectus muscles, shown by the arrows here. Those muscles insert on the top and bottom of the eyeball, and also on each side. There are 2 other muscles called oblique muscles that insert on the side of the eyeball. Now think about what needs to happen in order for your eyes to move. The action of these 6 muscles needs to be coordinated. You don't want muscles on opposite side of the eye to contract at the same time. You need for one muscle to contract and the other muscle to relax. And so the nervous system coordinates the action of these muscles. And a very intricate control is necessary in order to give the smooth movement of our eyes that we don't even think about. It just happens kind of automatically. Now let's talk about the photoreceptors. The rods and cones absorb light, and then they transmit signals to the nervous system. Let's take a closer look. Here on the left, we see a rod. Over on the right, we have a cone. Both of them have a stack of little discs made of a membrane, and those membranes have photopigments that will absorb the light. So in the cones, different photopigments will absorb different colors of light. The rods are not for color vision. They are able to pick up very tiny amounts of light, and so we're able to see in dim light. Our night vision is black and white, whereas when we have good light, we are able to see color. Visual information from the rods and cones then needs to be transmitted to the brain. Here is the primary visual cortex of the brain that's going to interpret the information from those photoreceptors. And notice that we have some nerve pathways that go through the brain, as well as up here we have the optic nerve. Another very important aspect of our vision is the fact that the brain processes and interprets the visual information. Now, when we look at an object like this picture of the Mona Lisa, here we have the rods and cones of the retina. So the cones are picking up red, green, and blue aspects of color here, whereas the rods pick up a black and white image. And then different parts of the brain process the retinal output and then reconstruct and interpret what we have seen. But there's another important component. The information that's being transmitted from the photoreceptors is transmitted by little chemicals called neurotransmitters from one nerve to another. And then along the nerve, there are little electrical signals called action potentials that are used to transmit this information. It's a very complex process. This is the back of the eye, and here we have some pigment that helps to reduce light scatter within the eyeball. On top of this pigmented epithelium, we find our rods and cones, our photoreceptors. But notice that on top of them, we've got some other cells called bipolar cells that help process information. And we have some ganglion cells that do some other processing. And on top of that, we have the axons of the optic nerve, the little nerve fibers of the optic nerve. Well, this is a problem. Evolutionists will say that the vertebrate eye is a poorly designed evolutionary accident. Well, you and I are vertebrates. We have a spinal column. We have a vertebrate eye. So why do evolutionists say that our eyes are poorly designed evolutionary accidents? Well, it's because these cell layers are arranged backwards. Remember, we said that it's at the back that we have our rods and cones, and then on top of it, we've got these other layers of cells and some nerve tissue. That means that light must pass through several different layers before it reaches the photoreceptors. So we have light coming through the cornea, through the pupil, through the lens, going back through the vitreous humor to the retina. And then when it reaches the retina, it has to go through all these layers in order to reach the photoreceptors. This will result in a loss of efficiency of your light transmission. That's why evolutionists say that the eye is a poorly designed accident of evolution. Well, there was a fascinating discovery that was made that shows that one type of cell back in the retina called Muller cells, those cells are actually living optical fibers. Can you believe it? Your eye has living fiber optics. And the Muller cells transmit light through these layers of cells directly back to the photoreceptors. And this transmission is highly efficient. And so this is not an inefficient evolutionary accident. Instead, the retina is an incredibly sophisticated design that transmits light in a highly efficient manner through these Muller cells, these living fiber optics. Now let's talk about evolution of the eye. To go from nothing to an eye would be a very big jump. And even if you have a little eye spot that has some photoreceptors, to evolve from a little eye spot to the complex vertebrate eye would be a huge jump. And so Darwin actually recognized that this is one of the difficulties of his theory of evolution by natural selection. In the book Origin of Species, he says to suppose that the eye, with all its complicated structures, could have been formed by natural selection seems, I freely confess, absurd in the highest degree. So Charles Darwin was saying that the idea that this eye, this complex eye, could evolve through natural selection seems absurd. And yet he goes on to propose a series of what he thought might be relatively small steps that could produce an eye. He proposed that we would go from a little eye spot to an indented eye spot. And then we would add some fluid, some aqueous humor. And then we would add a lens. And eventually we would wind up with this complex vertebrate eye. But I'd like to point out that even these steps are gigantic leaps. So here's a really important question. Is there a known biological mechanism that could actually evolve one type of eye into another that could evolve a simple eye spot into a more complex eye spot, which then would evolve into a simple eye with a lens, and finally would evolve into the vertebrate eye. Is there any biological mechanism that could do this? Well, the answer to that question depends on your worldview. If you are a naturalistic scientist who believes that there are no supernatural interventions, everything is the result of natural law, you're going to say, of course there's a mechanism. We know that life is the result of evolution. But if you are from the intelligent design movement, you're going to say, no, there is no mechanism that can produce the biological information that is needed to evolve a new type of eye. There is no mechanism to generate something called irreducible complexity. Design is worth considering. Well, what is irreducible complexity? Michael Behe wrote a book called Darwin's Black Box and pointed out that if you have a cell system, or you could apply this to other systems in the body, but if there are several complex essential parts and all parts must be present or the system won't work, then this is irreducibly complex. And that means you can't evolve by gradual steps. It means that every single part must be in place in order for this system to work. Behe uses the simple mousetrap as an example of a device that's irreducibly complex. A mousetrap needs a hammer, it needs a bait holder, it needs a spring and a trigger that are attached to a board with a staple. And if you take away any one of these parts, you will never catch a mouse. Every part is necessary in order for the mousetrap to function. So this is an example of an irreducibly complex device. Well, the eye is also an irreducibly complex device. The visual system is an irreducibly complex system. If you remove any one of these parts, the eye will not work. Furthermore, if you remove a nerve pathway or the visual cortex of the brain, or if you just damage them, vision will be impaired or absent. So the visual system is an excellent example of irreducible complexity. But the most critical problem for evolution is the origin of information. If you're going to make a functional eye, you need information. And in biological systems, information is encoded in DNA. So for the eye, DNA contains the code for the cornea, the lens, the iris, the photoreceptors, muscles, and nerves. It also codes for how to put it all together and for how to make it all function. How did this detailed information contained in the DNA, how did that originate? That is the most critical problem for the idea that this visual system could have evolved. Does information originate by chance? If I take a bunch of letters and shake them around in a box and dump them out onto the table, will they form words? No, of course not. And the law of gravity isn't going to cause words to form. There are no natural laws that are going to form words. Rather, it's the action of intelligent beings that originates information. Information requires intelligent thought. It requires planning. It requires a mind to invent it. And so the biological information that is needed to make an eye, to make the visual system, and to make it function, that biological information requires an intelligent designer. So in summary, we are looking at some very strong evidence for design as we look at the eye. The eye is amazing in the way it's put together, and it's amazing in the way it functions. And the irreducible complexity of this visual system is evidence for design. The information that is required is another very strong evidence for design. And so as we are celebrating creation, we can look at the eye and say, wow, we are looking at an amazing design from an amazing designer, our Creator God.